mind. It makes the mind more receptive to then talk about, well, if we actually embrace some of these constraints that we think are holding us back in a world where we're open to thinking about the way we go to market in very different ways, then those two things start to come together and we can see the opportunities in a way that maybe we couldn't before.
I remember reading a number of years ago, digging back into the origin of the word habit and what it means, and it relates to habitat, where we live, and it's also related to the clothing of nuns, of their habit, of what they wear, but it comes from the same root. Our habits are where we live. It is what surrounds us, what we, I guess, metaphorically wear in our lives, and we often don't think that, as you said before, it's our habits define us. They own us. They are what we are. They make us, because that's where we live. And once I saw it from that perspective, I realized that we also have a choice of where we live and what we wear and what we embrace and surround ourselves with. So there is that opportunity to make changes. And Charles Duhigg's book on habits was very eye-opening and insightful for me a couple of years ago. That, in terms of where we live and how to break that path dependence, if you will, on where we live and what we do.
Yeah, well, and just to, sort of, in a sense, make a counterpoint to that, which is everybody knows, Steve Jobs only wore the same outfit every single day. President Obama apparently has two suits.
Gray and blue.
Gray and blue. And they do this, these people, to reduce the cognitive load. So, any human being, any entity really has a certain amount of processing power, if you like. And Obama just wants to not spend any of his processing power thinking about what to wear every morning. So he chooses from one of those two suits, done. Steve Jobs, same thing. Because they want to free up as much cognitive power as they can to make all the difficult decisions they face during a day. So these habits and behaviors really serve us very well until they don't. And, the question that we're posing at the very beginning of this book is to just have a little bit more self-awareness about, yes, some of these habits are still good. Let's protect them. Let's keep them. But which of them actually need to be challenged in some way? So that story that's in the book about the luxury car dealers, we ran a big session.
Great story.
Yeah, and it was a great experience for us because we're at this gorgeous hotel, the Four Seasons Aviara. I'm told it's not a Four Seasons anymore, which is slightly perturbing to me, but back then it was. And the Four Seasons Aviara is just somewhere north of San Diego. Beautiful spot, gorgeous, gorgeous. And the epitome of a luxury experience. So we'd taken these luxury car dealers to that resort. And one of the aspects of the work we were doing was to tour the Four Seasons and see how it was that they created a luxury experience at every single touch point. Not just in the guest rooms and look at the amenities, but let's go into the laundry. Let's go and talk to house cleaning. Let's talk to the valets about how they park cars and so on. And one of the things that revealed, we were in the laundry and, it's a big room with 100 laundry machines going and it's noisy, and this young man, and you've got 20, 30 car dealers in the laundry of this fabulous luxury hotel, and the guy standing on a chair and he's telling these guys about with the greatest enthusiasm about how important the laundry is in creating that luxury experience, many different aspects of it. We come back up, we're in the fabulous meeting room again, and the manager of the Four Seasons properties there talking to us about what we'd seen, what we'd noticed. And one of the dealers stands up and says, I was really impressed by that young man I met in the laundry and the enthusiasm with which he spoke about his job. If I could get my back end to be as enthusiastic as that about servicing cars, we'd be golden. What do you suggest I do? How do I get that? And the Four Seasons manager stands up and looks him in the eyes. He says, well, the first thing you do is you stop referring to him as the back end. Here we call these people the heart of house. And he said, I know who that is. I know his resume. I know his family. I know everybody else that works in that laundry too. And they are important. And the language we use to define them, to describe them, heart of house, it epitomizes the way that we feel about these people. So you could see the light bulb go off for this dealer. He was asked, how often do you go to the quote unquote back end? How often are you in there talking to these people? How important do they feel? And the answer was not sufficiently, it's not in there enough. And the data in the car industry suggests, and it was talked about in that moment, that one of the primary purchase drivers around automobile choices is the experience that you've had with your previous car. And the experience you've had is determined as much by the service experience as it is by the initial transaction and what's in the car. So committing to building a more of a heart of house mentality inside that luxury dealership was going to be critical to creating loyalty over the long term. But that dealer had not seen that opportunity in that way because, the quarterbacks of the car industry are the sales guys, right? These are the guys who close the deal, who bring the money in, who get the customers. And just flipping that model on its head was an important breakthrough in terms of allowing us to open up a new conversation about all the different opportunities that existed there.
Let's back up a little bit into some of the stages that problem solvers go through, because you're kind of touching on some of those to my ear. And I remember from early in your book, you define 3 stages. Talk a little bit about why they're stages and not types of personalities, why it's important to understand them, work your way through them in that early part of the process when you're facing a challenging constraint.
We were thinking about, what are people's relationships to constraints? And we had a sort of working hypothesis before we started doing the research in earnest that there were these 3 different types, quite crude, but useful to us in terms of helping structure the thinking, which was the victim mentality, which is, holy mackerel, this thing is impossible, and I'm going to have to reduce my ambitions in the face of this constraint. Then the next stage down that continuum, if you like, is the neutralizer, who says, okay, this is kind of an issue. I'll figure out how to work around it or deal with it in some kind of way, but I can probably still get my job done and meet my ambitions. And then there's all the way over to the right-hand side of that spectrum, the transformer stage, which is, I see this opportunity in this limitation, and I'm going to use this as the impetus to create something really new. And so we thought that, typically you get 3 different kinds of people, and there are, legendary designers, problem solvers who've been able to do this kind of thing routinely, who are by definition a transformer. You think about Yves Behar and all the work that he's done across all kinds of different categories with the Fuse project team, and they just never seem to be able to find a constraint that they don't find opportunity in. So there's a transformer, but most of us are somewhere down towards victim. We then, identified some transformers to go talk to about this. And one of the first people we spoke to is Michael Beirut, the famous designer for pentagrams, well known for his work across many different clients, including the New York Times building in New York. And Adam was interviewing him, was explaining this hypothesis to Michael, and Michael said, I got to tell you, every time I get one of these quote unquote impossible briefs across my desk, I always start in that victim mindset. I always kind of get angry. I always throw my arms up and go, well, we're never going to be able to solve this. And he said, it just takes me a while to start moving along that continuum. So even Michael Beirut, somebody who has obviously great skills, and he's very capable, and a remarkable track record of having done this time and time again.
Legendary in his field.
Yeah. But he starts in that victim mindset. He described it as kind of like a game of chutes and ladders. You just slide back down to the beginning again. And so it helped to open up this idea for us that there are stages in a journey. And the reason that's so critical for any of us, myself included, and maybe you, Charles, I'm not sure where you are on that spectrum, but is to acknowledge that in the beginning, when the competitor comes out with something that's radically different and changes the game. The boss walks into our office on Friday and says, your budget just got cut. There's a reorg and suddenly your team's half the size that it used to be. It's natural to go to that victim place. And actually, it's quite productive to start there and to allow yourself to bitch and moan about all the issues there. Let's get it out. It can be quite a cathartic experience. We looked at the motivation and the mindset and psychology of people that are dealing with very difficult constrained situations. And there is actually value, and I'll maybe come back to this and talk about it later, of dwelling on all the negatives for a while, and I'll talk why later. But the point is that we all tend to start there. The first instinct as a human being, it's almost like the fight or flight mechanism that's triggered by the imposition of a difficult constraint. We just kind of shrink from it and go, I'm either going to run away or I'm going to be combative. And allow yourself to go through that. But then start to just kind of try to figure out where might the opportunity lie in this. And the reason that we wanted to unpack the common elements that we'd seen across all these different diverse case studies into a repeatable methodology is to just give people the scaffolding, if you like, to build on. Okay, so I'm in the victim mindset. I know this is going to be hard. Let me go back to that book, that body of work that Eat Big Fish has produced, and understand, where the Audi engineers started, where the Brewdog entrepreneurs, how they solve their problem, and use those case studies that are in the book, not just as inspiration, which they are, and proof that it is a widespread phenomenon that people can find the opportunity in constraints, but to use those literally as a start point. So what if I thought of my situation in the way that Brewdog, in the way that Audi, in the way that IKEA, in the way that Nike thought about their constraints and how they resolve them. So, the book is there in part to give people the confidence and create that mindset that I can move, as many of these people did, from victim to transformer, give them places to start, give them a methodology to get going, and, move along that spectrum.
Well, you've got questions that go with each one of those. Do we believe it is possible? Do we know how to start to do it? And how much do I want to do it? To represent mindset, method, and motivation, which are great jumping off points for all of those.
Yeah, I mean, mindset, you've got to, there is no point in beginning a journey like this unless you believe it is possible, that you are going to be able to do this. And we meet so many people, and I suspect you do too, who all come up to us and say, well, I'm just not very creative, Mark. I just don't know if I can do this. And again, one of the things we're trying to prove in this book is that, by looking at school teachers, naval officers, car engineers, the whole spectrum, is to say, that maybe that's not true. Maybe you need to examine that self-limiting belief you have and that victim mentality and look at some of these case studies and prove to yourself that it is actually really widespread. Because unless you can get yourself to a point where I believe it is possible, you aren't going to be able to get off the dime and start. And, one of the simplest and most useful exercises we do with people when we walk into a room at a large company, saying they're trying to figure out, they've got all these constraints to deal with, is say to them, before we do any work together on your constraints, I want you to think about one of two different things. First of all, a story from your personal life. It could be you, could be a family member, could be your grandfather, whatever, that have been able to do this. Tell me a story about a beautiful constraint. And it might take them a few days to think about it. They'll go and, reflect and talk to people in the family. But being able to get them to tell their own version of this. Oh, actually, yeah. So for instance, I had this great story told to me. This guy said, I love fishing. And every fisherman knows that the way you find the best fish is to find the unfished fishing holes. There are secret places on the river that you can find. And he said, and you can only find those places if you've got a boat. But I live in a one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. I don't even have a garage, let alone a place to put a boat. So, I know I want to access those places, but I can't. So anyway, long story short, he says, the solution turned out to be a kayak. So he said, a kayak I can keep, I can store it, eat much more easily. I can take it and I can reach places on the river in a kayak that I couldn't reach in a big boat. So the thinking about how am I going to turn this constraint off? I don't have room for a big boat because I live in this one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. Led him to the kayak. The kayak allows him to access much better fishing holes. And as a consequence, he said, I'm much fitter because I'm kayaking out to the fishing holes. And he said, it just turned out to be a far, far better solution. But I started with this victim mindset of, well, I can't really do that. So, you replicate that. If you're in a room of 30 people, you replicate that exercise. Everybody's got a story. The other kind of story we asked them to to try to identify is stories from the history of their business. Most, even big companies, will have entrepreneurial backgrounds, and they'll have stories from their past about, do you remember back in the 80s when this happened? And our response to it was